So we're continuing on in our series in Luke's Gospel. We've come to chapter 23. I shall be reading the first 25 verses. Luke chapter 23 and the first 25 verses. And the whole company of them arose and brought him before Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king." And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no guilt in this man." But they were urgent, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place." When Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had long desired to see him, because he had heard about him, and he was hoping to see some sign done by him. So he questioned him at some length, but he made no answer. The chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him. And Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then, arraying him in splendid clothing, he sent him back to Pilate. And Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day, for before this they had been at enmity with each other. Pilate then called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people, and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was misleading the people. And after examining him before you, behold, I did not find this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Look, nothing deserving death has been done by him. I will therefore punish and release him." Now he was obliged to release one man to them at the festival. But they all cried out together, "Away with this man, and release to us Barabbas," a man who had been thrown into prison for an insurrection started in the city, and for murder. Pilate addressed them once more, desiring to release Jesus, but they kept shouting, "Crucify! Crucify him!" A third time he said to them, "Why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no guilt deserving death. I will therefore punish and release him." But they were urgent, demanding with loud cries that he should be crucified. And their voices prevailed. So Pilate decided that their demand should be granted. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, for whom they asked. But he delivered Jesus over to their will. Amen. As we come to this text, we need to remember that we're in that period that Jesus spoke of in the preceding chapter in verse 53. This is your hour and the power of darkness. We have already seen how it was the religious authorities who came to him, who took hold of him, who brought him before their own council, their council of the Jews and their ruling council, They questioned him. They accused him. But they could find no guilt in him except this: that when asked directly at the end of chapter 22 in verse 70, "Are you the Son of God then?" He, Jesus, said to them, "You say that I am." And what was the reaction that they had? Well, they understood what it was that Jesus was saying. For they see that this is Jesus claiming to be the Son of God, claiming to be God. And they see this as blasphemy. What more evidence do we need, they say. Here is the thing, friends. Jesus Christ is the eternal Son of God. He is their creator. He is the one who redeemed them from Egypt. He is the one who sent prophets to them, and now he has sent his Son to them. And yet, rather than embrace him for who he is, they reject him, accuse him of blasphemy, while they themselves blaspheme against God. To them, what is now needed is the sentence of death. That is what the law of God requires for those who blaspheme against the true and living God. But there is a problem. Under the rule of the Romans, they cannot carry out that sentence. It is not in their power. That power at this time belongs to the Roman authorities. But as we look at this text that we have seen today, we need to remember that this is all part of that which Jesus said would happen. Not only did he say that I will be betrayed by my own people, not only would he be handed over to his own people, but they would hand him over to the Gentiles. And so even as we look at these things and we see the sweep of emotions and the sweep of history, as it were, come upon these events, we need to remember that all this is in the plan and purpose of God. That he should stand before the secular authorities of Rome. And so that's where we join this text in verse 1. The whole company of them arose and brought him before Pilate. I just want to just spend a moment just to tell you what actually a momentous event that is in itself. That the whole company of them arose. You think, well, why is that, Phil? It's just a detail that they all got up and went to Pilate with Jesus. Well, that's the point. Remember, this council is a council divided in among itself. You have Sadducees, you have Pharisees, you have various other, perhaps, different parts of the thinking within the Jews. They would have great debates, I'm sure, among themselves about whether there's a resurrection or not. But on this issue concerning Jesus Christ, they are as one. When Jesus himself has stood before them, they rise as one to take him before Pilate. And there they are, accusing him. But notice in their accusation how what they're saying to Pilate is false. We found this man misleading our nation, forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar. That's a downright lie. They're in the very temple precincts. They asked, is it right for us to pay taxes to Caesar? What was it that Jesus said? Give to Caesar what is Caesar's. At no point did he ever set himself up as a rival to Caesar. At no point did he ever seek to bring about an insurrection among the people. Perhaps if he did, that council might have supported him, because they wanted rid of the Romans, but now it seems that they're great supporters of Rome as they seek to do away with Jesus. The only thing that they say which is true is that he says that he himself is Christ, a king. To which Pilate asks, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Now, Jesus' response, "You have said so," is a way in which it affirms what the questioner is answering. So here Jesus is saying, yes, I am the king of the Jews. But if you go to John's Gospel and you see that interaction between Jesus and Pilate, you see that there's a bit more behind this as Jesus speaks to Pilate of the fact that he's not a king that Pilate or Caesar in Rome needs to worry about. For he is not concerned with earthly power. He's not concerned with earthly glory. His kingdom is not of this world. He is king. But he is king of that great spiritual kingdom that he is establishing. He is not as some have made him, even in our own age. Some have taken that famous image of Che Guevara and turned it into an image of Jesus to try and make it out that Jesus was some kind of freedom fighter or rebel against authority. But it cannot be justified. It's just not true. He was no threat to the Romans. But those who were his accusers among the Jewish people were trying to find anything they could get their hands on to make Pilate do their will. And if they could persuade him that this man was going to whip up crowds and come up against the Romans and subvert their rule, then they will use that, even though they themselves want to see the Romans gone. Friends, don't we see this? We see this in people's reactions to Jesus all the time. They're presented with who he is, how he truly is in the scriptures, and yet they will not embrace him, they will not put their faith in him, and they will make him into something that he isn't. In fact, they'll be full of animosity towards him. Why? What has he done? What is it about his teaching that they despise so much? But we know it, don't we? Perhaps we know people within our own families who have rejected him in this way. And here he is before this secular authority, showing to Pilate that he is no threat to Roman rule. He is no threat to the peace of this region of the empire. And so Pilate says in verse 4, "I find no guilt in this man." In this, Pilate is right. There is no guilt in him. And that statement is true, truer than actually Pilate is intending, isn't it? Because it's not just that he's not guilty of those things they're accusing him of, it's that there is no guilt in him whatsoever. This is the holy, the perfect one, the Son of God, there. But he stands before his accusers. Here's some irony in verse 5. He stirs up the people. We're going to see that actually it's these members of the council who will stir up the people. But they accuse him of going throughout all Judea, even in Galilee, down into Jerusalem. Again, you and I, we've read the gospel up to this point. We know this is complete nonsense. Yes, great crowds have come to him. But what have they come for? Is it for a freedom fighter? Is it for a zealot? No. You can go elsewhere for them. But in him there is one who's full of love and compassion, authority in his teaching, healing the sick, feeding the hungry, all those things that we have seen. He has not been whipping up the people. He has not been stirring them up to insurrection. But this gives Pilate an out. Because hearing that all this was happening in Galilee, He thinks, hold on a minute, the Tetrarch of Galilee, the one that the Romans have put in place to rule that area, he's in town for the Passover. I'll send him to him. He can deal with this local problem, and hopefully I don't have to deal with this anymore. So off Jesus is sent to Herod. Luke is the only one who tells us of this. And we're told that Herod, this is the son of Herod the Great, Herod Antipas, he's excited. Remember what we've been told about this Herod. He's obviously got some kind of interest in spiritual things because he wanted to hear John the Baptist. But we also see that it didn't get him very far because he made a rash vow to his wife's daughter that he would give to her anything that she asked. And she asks for the head of John the Baptist. And so it is this Herod that puts John to death. It looks as if he learned nothing from that episode. For even though he's excited to see Jesus, he's heard all about him, he does not make the most of the opportunity. What is it that we see him do? He wants to see some sign. He questions him at length. But Jesus, as we were told in Isaiah 53, made no answer. And the chief priests and scribes are there vehemently accusing him. And because he can't get anything out of Jesus, he's not a performing monkey who will do whatever he asks him to do. He turns to abuse. He turns to mockery. Again, friends, don't we see this among the peoples of today? There is Jesus. Jesus was there for Herod in Galilee. Herod could have gone out of his palace at any point he wanted to go and hear him. Many did. But he never took the opportunity. Now Jesus is there right in front of him. He doesn't seriously take this opportunity that's presented to him. Instead, he turns to mockery because he doesn't get what he wants out of him. So many come to Jesus thinking that he's like a cosmic vending machine that will give to them what they desire. But he will not be that for them. He cannot be that for them. And not seeing Jesus for who he truly is, they turn to mockery. Think of the comedians of our day who think it's funny to mock Jesus Christ. But rather than react as you and I might if we were faced with such a thing, he remains silent. This is what Jesus Christ must suffer, what he must take, not only from the Jewish leaders and authorities, but even from these secular authorities. This is part of his humiliation, it's part of his suffering, and this is all being done, remember, for our sakes. The mockery extends even to dressing him up in splendid clothing, the clothing of a king or a ruler. And back he goes to Pilate. We see that in the midst of the horrific events of this day, a friendship is made, Herod and Pilate becoming friends when they were enemies before. But Pilate tries again. I examined him. There's no guilt, particularly against those charges that you brought against him. Herod tried. He didn't find anything. Nothing deserving death has been done by him. I will therefore punish and release him. It's the right answer, isn't it? Nothing has been done by Jesus Christ. Nothing. Sorry, Pilate's right in saying these things, isn't he? Jesus is completely guilt-free. He's done nothing deserving of death. So from a judge's perspective, he's right. I'll punish him just to make you feel better and then I'll release him. But instead what comes out now is that there is this custom of releasing a man at the festival of the Passover. And so they all cry out together, "No, do away with this man and release to us Barabbas." Verse 19 is Luke telling us who that is. A man who is in prison. He's an insurrectionist and a murderer. He is everything that the Jewish authorities are accusing Jesus of. He actually did stir up the people to come against Rome. And more than that, he took a man's life, if not more. He is a murderer. He is one of the greatest sinners of his day. He's a criminal. And yet they call for him rather than the Son of God, the perfect Holy One, Jesus Christ. Just think of that. See the depth of sin that is going on at this moment. Don't turn away from it. See the horror of this moment. That the crowds are being whipped up to demand Jesus of Nazareth, the perfect, spotless, Holy One, rather than this criminal and murderer. And despite Pilate seeing no guilt and wanting to release him, instead the cries for the crucifixion of Jesus get louder and louder and louder. I want you to look at the end of verse 23 and 24 to see the weakness of mankind. Think of this for a moment. Pilate is the authority of Rome in that place. When he stands there in this position of judge, he's standing there as if it's Caesar himself standing there. He has all power and all authority that he could ever desire at this moment. If he wanted to release Jesus, he could. He could just do it. Regardless of what the hue and cry might be, he could do it. If he was bold, if he was brave, if he was willing to stand up against the crowd. But here is his weakness. Now, it's a weakness that comes from experience. He's found that the Jewish people can be a bit awkward. That's putting it lightly. Pilate, in his early time in Judea, did some things that went up against the Jewish sensibilities, and he knew about it. And so in this moment, we maybe can give him some slack because he's seeing this crowd get louder and louder, and he's thinking, if this continues, I actually will have an insurrection on my hands. And so maybe he's thinking of the peace of Jerusalem at this moment. To dampen them down, to quiet them down, to give into their demands, even though there is no ground for them, so that things will be peaceful and quiet. The soldiers can stay in their barracks, and I don't have to deal with anything more from the Jewish people. But he still could have stood firm. And this one man at this pivotal moment of history decided that their demand should be granted. He releases Barabbas, and he delivered Jesus over to their will. Friends, see the sin. See the weakness. There is the sin of the religious authorities who want to condemn him for no reason. See the vitriol in their hearts towards him for no reason. But see the secular authorities mocking Jesus. And then in Pilate, the weakness that he shows in condemning him to death, not with the power of his own conviction, but listening to the voice of a crowd. What do we make of these things? Well, friends, part of what I've wanted to do today is just to show them to you. Because it is right for us to see these things, to meditate upon them in and of themselves, to see what it was that Jesus suffered, to see how he fulfilled Isaiah 53 and other sections of the scriptures in being silent before his accusers, in not railing against them, but accepting all of this abuse, accepting all of these false accusations, of standing there and receiving all these things from the hands both of the religious and the secular. But even then, that leads us to the question, what does this have to do with us? Why should we spend that time meditating upon it? Well, the answer is partly because of that fulfillment. It is because this is the plan and purpose of God. And the plan and the purpose of God was that the perfect, holy, and spotless one should be exchanged with an insurrectionist and a murderer. And not just Barabbas. For Barabbas is standing here for all of us. The sinless, spotless, holy one of God, the Christ himself, the anointed one of God, God's own Son, in whom there was no guilt. As Pilate rightly said, was to be exchanged for one who had committed great sin and was under the sentence of death. For in these things, the plan and purpose of God to lay upon Jesus Christ our transgressions was being played out. Here we see the weakness of men, or the mockery of men, or the vindictiveness of men. But behind all these things is that hand of God for the salvation of a people for himself. To take guilty sinners and place their sins upon the spotless, guiltless one. Friends, that is why I've wanted to show you these things today. Because in it we see the work of Christ for our redemption. You and I are those who have committed insurrection. Not against Rome, not against the government of our day, but against the ruler of the whole universe, God himself. We thought that we could live without him, that we could rebel against him and have no consequences. But the truth is that there are consequences. He will not be mocked. He will not have the anger and vitriol of men directed against him without consequence. He will not have weak men not embrace him, but instead turn away and follow the crowd. No, he is God. But neither can he have these sinful men and women come before him. For he is holy and just. And so he provides the means by which you and I, as murderers and insurrectionists, can come to him and have fellowship with him. And that means is the Lord Jesus Christ. Everything that Jesus suffers in these verses is for you. Everything. For he has made that great exchange. The sinless for the sinner. So that you and I might live. Friends, do not join the crowd. Don't join the mockery. Don't seek to do away with Jesus Christ, but see him here as that humble sacrifice who stood silently before his accusers, so that that great exchange was made, and trust in all that he has done for your salvation. And praise be to God. Amen.